Not only do we not experience ourselves as existence, consciousness, bliss, rather we experience ourselves as limited beings, or these bodies of flesh and blood. We experience ourselves as body-mind complexes. That's what we see ourselves as. So Vedanta, in order to take us to the goal, to make us realize that we are Brahman, has to show us that we are not bodies and minds. It has to show us first, it has to demonstrate beyond any doubt that we are not these bodies and minds, which we take ourselves to be without any doubt at all. Vedanta has to create a doubt in our minds. Are we really this body? Really this mind? How does Vedanta do that? There are many ways. The way adopted in this text, what we have been seeing in the past 2 classes, the way is this. In all our experience, whatever we experience, there is a subject and an object. There is an experiencer and there is the experienced. There is a seer and the seen. When I look at this microphone, the microphone is the object of my experience, I am the subject. I am the experiencer, the microphone is the experienced. I am the seer, and the microphone is the seen. And the subject and the object are different. They are different entities. The experiencer and the experienced are different entities. The seer and the seen are always different entities. And Vedanta takes advantage of this fact. It takes advantage of the fact that 2 things. First of all our experience is subject and object, seer and seen. And the seer and the seen are always different, number 1. Number 2, we always are the seer. In any experience, we always know who are we? The subject of the experience, the experiencer, the seer. Now, holding on to these 2 facts, this text has taken us on a journey. It says, look at the world. With your eyes, look at the world. The things that you see are the objects of your vision. Your eyes are the subject. The eyes are different from what they see. The seer and the seen are different. Go deeper. The eyes themselves are the object of our experience. My eyes are open, closed, or whatever. When the eyes become the object of my experience, I am the experiencer of my eyes. Experiencer of my eyes means I know the condition of my eyes. I know whether they are open, whether they are closed, whether I can see, whether I cannot see. All these things I know. What knows? The mind. The mind is the experiencer, and the sense organs, the eyes and ears and nose and so forth, are the experienced. And the mind is different from the sense organs. So I must be the mind experiencing my own sensory system. Go deeper. The contents of our minds, thoughts, emotions, perceptions, ideas, memories, even the Vedanta that we are reading, they're contents of our minds. And we are aware of these contents. Are we not aware that we are happy or we are sad, that we understand or do not understand, as the case may be, but we feel it. So there is something within which is the subject for which the mind itself is an object. So mind becomes an object, the seen, and there's a subject, the witness of the mind, which is the ultimate subject according to Vedanta. Pure consciousness, the witness consciousness deep within us, that is what we really are, watching our minds. With our minds, we experience our bodies and sense organs. With our bodies and sense organs, we experience the world. We means that witness consciousness. This is the story so far. Now, several questions will arise. You see, it's fine to logically divide ourselves into pure consciousness, the witness consciousness and everything else. Minds, sense organs, body and the world on one side, and the witness consciousness on the other side. We are the witness consciousness, and everything else we witness, they are seen, and we are the seer. But if you think about it, you will immediately say, wait a moment, you will immediately say that. There is a difference between the way we experience this book, for example, or the microphone, and the way we experience our bodies. You see, the first practical objection should be, it is true that the microphone or that device is different from me, and my body is not different in that way, because I feel my body. My body is part of my identity. I never say, I am a book or I am an electronic device. I can say it is my book, it is his electronic device, but I do not say I am these. But I say not only that it is my body, but I often say I am the body. I am tall or thin, male or female, young or old. These are characteristics of the body. So I identify with my body, which I do not with objects outside. And more precisely, why do we identify ourselves with our bodies? Because there is consciousness in the body. We are aware. We can touch our bodies. I feel the touch. I feel cold. I feel heat. If you pinch me, I feel pain. In one of the texts written by Sankaracharya, when he's talking about this discrimination between the body and the witness consciousness, the student says, "But sir, it hurts. Even after all this analysis, the body is an object, it still hurts." So why is it, if I am the witness consciousness, why is it that I feel consciousness in the body? Not only that, my sense organs are bright with consciousness. I see. It's a conscious experience. It's not just a witness. I'm actually seeing. I hear. You can touch me. I feel it. In the mind, I think. I have emotions. I have ideas. These are all conscious experiences. And there is consciousness here. So how does consciousness come to the body? From the witness consciousness, how does consciousness come to the body? How is it that the body feels conscious? So this is the question. And that we shall take up in the next verse. These are subtle questions. If the question is clear in our mind, the answer will be, it will be thrilling to read the answer. And we can check with facts. Isn't it true? What they are saying, it's true. Let's see. What do they say? Chichaya veshato buddho, chichaya veshato buddho, bhanam dhistu dvidha sthita, bhanam dhistu dvidha sthita, ekaham kritiranya syad, ekaham kritiranya syad, antakarana rupini, antakarana rupini. Okay. Let's talk about this and I'll come back to the Sanskrit. In Indian philosophy, there is a distinction between the self, the subtle body, and the gross body. The gross body is the physical body. The body which is sitting here, the body about which I say it weighs 60 kgs or 100 kgs or whatever. That's the gross body. And thoughts, emotions, feelings, memories, personality, all of that, the subtle thing within, it's called the subtle body. And beyond this is the atman, the self, we ourselves. So the Indian philosopher, not just Vedanta, others too, they have a trichotomous view of the human personality. It's not just body-mind. It's body, mind, self. Gross body, subtle body, and the self. Gross body, subtle body, and the self. Trichotomous view, threefold view of the human personality. The word soul in English is ambiguous. When we say soul, S-O-U-L, soul, we have to make it clear whether we mean the mind or the self. The word soul in English comprises of both the self and the mind. They are put together in literature, in philosophy, even in science. It's together, the body and the soul. When we say body and soul, the body is the gross body. The soul, the word soul actually includes, it can be mean either the subtle body or the self. So you have to make a distinction there. Now, in Vedanta we say the witness consciousness is reflected in the subtle body. The witness consciousness is reflected in the subtle body. Let's try to understand this. Imagine the sun. When the sun shines, light is reflected from all surfaces, from houses, from rocks, from trees and plants, from cars. Everything reflects light. But there are some surfaces, like a pool of water, or like a shining metal disc, or like a mirror. They not only reflect the sunlight, you will find an image of the sun, a little sun formed there, an image of the sun. All surfaces are not able to do that. There are certain clear surfaces which can do that. A polished surface. It will not only reflect the light, you will find a little sun shining there. A dewdrop, you will find a little sun shining there. A steel plate, you will find a little sun. A glass, a mirror, you will find a little sun shining there. Exactly like that, the subtle body, our minds, have the capacity of reflecting the witness consciousness. The witness consciousness is reflected in our minds. And it is called the reflected consciousness. So you have two now: witness consciousness, reflected consciousness. The reflected consciousness is a reflection of the real witness, the atman, the pure consciousness in the mind. Nothing very fancy here. Just now we feel conscious. We all, I hope we feel conscious. Because Vedanta has a way of switching off consciousness. If we look inside, we feel, we are aware, we are thinking, we are feeling, we are trying to understand. We see, we hear. All this is consciousness. And the consciousness that we feel inside is exactly this reflected consciousness. The consciousness, the sentience, the awareness which we feel right now, all of us, is that reflected consciousness. The mind gets consciousness from this reflected consciousness. Pure or witness consciousness reflected in the mind or the subtle body. Reflected consciousness. And that reflected consciousness shines in the mind, and the mind gets consciousness. It borrows consciousness. And the mind which has borrowed consciousness illumines, reflects that consciousness, sends that consciousness, transmits that consciousness to our sensory system. And our eyes, our ears, our nose, our skin, they all, lights are thrown on, Lights come on there. One by one, the lights come on. It's just like at night when you look up there, the sky and the earth are illumined. By what? By the moonlight. We see the moonlight. But if you know, we all know, the moon doesn't have light of its own. It borrows light from the sun and reflects it back on the earth. And we use that moonlight to see things at night. And when we were kids in school, we have all read list of luminous bodies. Before we go deeper into physics, we read list of luminous bodies in the sky, sun and moon and stars. But we are making a mistake there, which is explained later on as we grow older. The moon does not belong in the same category as the sun and the stars, because the moon does not have light of its own. It borrows sunlight, reflects it on earth, and it's as good as light, because we can use that light to see and do work at night. But we know, even though the moon is shining, for all practical purposes it is giving us light, but we know beyond the horizon, we cannot see it, but the sun is shining forth, and its light is falling on the moon and comes to the earth, by which we experience light, moonlight. Exactly like that, the mind and the sense organs do not have consciousness of their own, Vedanta says. It is the witness consciousness, the sakshi, the witness consciousness which we arrived at in the last two classes. That witness consciousness shining on the mind becomes the reflected consciousness. And that reflected consciousness illumines the mind. And the sense organs borrow consciousness from the mind. And the body now borrows consciousness from the sensory system. To the point that the sensory system functions, the Upanishad says, anakagrat, I have spread myself up to the tips of my fingernails. I have spread myself up to the tips of my fingernails. Up to this point, I am. We all feel that right now. Beyond this, I am not. This is me, this is not me. How does that work? Because this body is conscious. Where did the body get consciousness from? Does it belong to the body? No, it does not belong to the body. How do you know it does not belong to the body? Because sometimes the body is conscious, and when the body dies, or when we fall unconscious, the body loses consciousness. It does not act as a conscious being anymore. So the body does not have its own consciousness. You see, there is this concept of intrinsic consciousness and borrowed consciousness. What's the difference? Borrowed consciousness is that which comes and goes. Intrinsic consciousness is that which stays. A very simple example would be when we cook. The fire is burning, and we put a vessel on the fire, and we put water in the vessel, and we put vegetables in the water. After some time, the vegetables are hot. They get boiled. So the vegetables, the heat of the vegetables, the heat in the vegetables, does it belong to the vegetables? If it did, it would always be hot. But if you switch off when you serve it, put it out there, very soon the vegetables are cold. So the heat does not belong to the vegetables. When they were in the refrigerator, they were cold, and in the pan they are hot. When you serve them out, after some time they become cold. So it becomes cold because the heat in the vegetables was borrowed. Borrowed from what? From the boiling water. Does the water have heat of its own, intrinsic heat? No. Because it was cold earlier, now it's boiling. And after some time it will become cold again. Therefore it has borrowed its heat. Where has the water borrowed the heat from? From the pan, which is red hot. Does the pan have heat of its own? No. It's borrowed its heat. Where has it borrowed its heat from? From the fire. And the fire, where has it borrowed its heat from? It has heat of its own. As long as the fire lasts, it will be hot. It has intrinsic heat. Whenever the fire is there, it is hot. Consciousness is borrowed in the body from the sensory system, the nervous system. And the sensory system has borrowed consciousness from the mind. And the mind has borrowed consciousness from the reflected consciousness. And the reflected consciousness is borrowed from the sakshi, the witness consciousness. And the witness consciousness is borrowed from nobody. It is intrinsic consciousness. It is consciousness itself. It's always there. It's always consciousness. Whereas the mind and the sensory system lose consciousness. In deep sleep, not conscious. And in death, when the mind, the subtle body goes away to other worlds, maybe to other births, then the body lies dead. No longer do we say, that is me. We don't say that. So, the body has borrowed consciousness from the sensory system from the mind from the reflected consciousness in the mind, and the reflected consciousness is borrowed from the witness consciousness, the sakshi, which we are. We lend consciousness to this, and then up to the tips of my fingers I say, I am conscious. That accounts for the difference between this body and this microphone. Though this body is an object of experience, this microphone is also an object of experience. What causes confusion is there is consciousness in the body. That's why we feel, I am this body. But the fact is, I am not this body. Now let us look at the verse. We'll see, it's very easy to understand. For those of you who are following the Sanskrit, Chitchaya veshato buddho bhanam. In the subtle body, in the buddhi, in the subtle body, various terms are used. In the subtle body, Chitchaya. Literally it means the shadow of consciousness. This is the sixth verse. Chitchaya means, literally it means the shadow of consciousness. Or in our terms, reflected consciousness. Reflected consciousness shines in the mind, and hence we get bhanam, knowledge. What knowledge? Every knowledge. All kinds of knowledge are possible: seeing, hearing, thinking, understanding, loving, hating, wanting, meditating. All of that is possible because of the reflected consciousness in the mind. Now, he does something here. Dhistu dvidha sthita. The mind, let us divide it into two parts. Now he's dividing the mind itself, the subtle body, into two parts. In Vedanta, normally we divide the inner instrument, what is called the antakarana, into four parts: mind, intellect, ego, memory. Mana, buddhi, ahamkara and chitta. If you know the famous hymn of Sankaracharya, Chidananda Rupa Shivoham Shivoham. So it starts off with Mano buddhi ahamkara chittani naham. I am not the mind, I am not the intellect, I am not the ego sense, I am not the memory also. Now, this is how Vedanta divides the inner, the antakarana. But here, the author has done something different and on purpose. We'll very soon see what the author has done. The author says, look inside, look at the mind, divide it into two parts. One part, the I sense, ego. What's that? It's exactly what you're feeling now, what I'm feeling now, the I. Just think, I. Adi Sankara, I am sitting here. I am speaking. The I. That's one part of the mind. The other part of the mind, the rest of the mind. Intellect, the mind itself, memory, manas, buddhi and chitta. That's the rest of the mind. And the ego. He isolates the ego from the rest of the mind. That bears repeating. What he has done now, look at the mind, you will find there are many things going on in the mind. There is thinking, there is feeling, there is memory coming up, there is understanding, and there is also something called the I. An ego sense, which comes up all the time. I. Focus on the I, leave the rest aside. Why does he do that? You see, that's what's most important to us. Who is most important to us? First person, I. Okay, focus on that I. Now, having isolated that, he goes to the next verse. Chaya ahamkarayoraikyam ahamkarayoraikyam taptaya pindavanmatam tadahankara tadahatmyat dehaschetanatamagat. It will be very easy to understand now. What he says, the I sense in our mind, the ego sense. Remember, what else is there in the mind? The reflected consciousness. The reflected consciousness all the time. In the mind, the reflected consciousness is there. The reflected consciousness and the I, they become one. How do they become one? Just like when I look in a mirror, there's a reflected face in the mirror. When I look in a mirror, there's a reflected face in the mirror, and the reflected face and the mirror are one. They become identified. You cannot separate them. Whenever there is a mirror, there will be a reflection. So the reflection and the mirror are one. The reflection here is the reflected consciousness. Your face is the original consciousness, the witness consciousness, and the mirror is the I sense. Mirror is the I sense, ahamkara. The ahamkara, the I sense, ego, and the reflected consciousness are one, like the reflection and a mirror. They become one. And the ego catches the reflected consciousness and transmits it to the rest of the mind, and the mind transmits it to the sensory system, and the sensory system transmits it to the body. He's showing how this body feels conscious. You see, tad ahamkara tadatmya. Look at the Sanskrit now. Because of the identification with the ego, identification of ego and what? Don't get confused. Ego and the reflected consciousness. The ego and the reflected consciousness, because they are identified, they become virtually identical. The ego becomes conscious. Just look inward. Let's look inside and we feel I. And it feels like the most conscious thing we have. The most conscious thing we experience is my I-ness. And that I-ness now transmits consciousness throughout the mind, through the sensory system, up to the ends of the body. Wherever the sensory system is functioning, we will feel consciousness. That's what it has said. Chaya ahankarayor aikyam. The oneness of the reflected consciousness and the ego sense is like what? It uses an ancient example. Like a red hot iron ball. A red hot iron ball. Imagine an iron ball in a factory in a blast furnace. When you push it inside, it comes out. It's round, it's heavy, but it's also glowing red and it's hot. Now there are two things there. What are the two things? It looks like one thing, a red, hot, round thing, heavy thing. But there are two things there. The heat of that iron ball, that red hot iron ball, the heat does not belong to the ball. Heat belongs to fire. The round shape of that thing, it belongs to the iron ball, not to the fire. The glow, the red glow, belongs to the fire, not to the iron ball. The weight belongs to the iron ball, not to the fire. So the fire and iron ball are mixed together, becomes one. It just looks like one thing, a shining thing. Just like that, the ego is like the iron ball. And the reflected consciousness is like fire. The reflected consciousness in the mind is like fire. And the ego is like iron ball. Fire is a good example of consciousness because it's bright. And the iron ball is a good example of the ego because it's an insentient, a thought. And the two are identified together and they shine. And then what happens? Tad ahamkara tad atman. Because of identification with the I becomes identified with the reflected consciousness, and the I is identified with the mind and the body. Don't we feel? My thoughts, my ideas, my memory, my person. I is identified with the mind, and with the mind and the body also. I, this body. So the I, which is already shining with the reflected consciousness, is also identified with the body, and the body gets this reflected consciousness. And the body feels conscious. I am conscious. Okay. Eighth verse and ninth verse. Really subtle and very important. He says, Swami, you say every verse is very important. Well, it's like that. I can't help it. But it's some extremely subtle and powerful ideas are given here. I guarantee it. If we get what they are saying, we'll already feel the bounds of Maya loosening. I'll go over this material slowly. What he has done so far, he has isolated the I. Focus on the I. I, the ego sense, me. Focus on it. Now, what are the other things around it? One is the reflected consciousness. Another one is the actual original witness consciousness. And the third thing is the body. Body. The body, the witness consciousness, and the reflected consciousness. These are the three things around what? Around me, I. Aham, I. There is a reflected consciousness. There is a witness consciousness according to Vedanta. And there is the body, I can see that. Now, what he's going to do is, he's going to show us, he's going to ask the question, what is my relationship to the body? What is my relationship to the reflected consciousness? And what is this I? What is its relationship to the witness consciousness? Three questions. What is the relationship of the I, that I which I'm feeling right now? That I, what is its relationship to this body? And the I which I'm feeling right now, what is its relationship to the reflected consciousness? What is the reflected consciousness? Just the consciousness we are feeling right now. All of us, we are feeling conscious, sentient, aware. What is its relationship? What is my relationship to consciousness? That I's relationship to consciousness. And what is the I's relationship to the witness consciousness, the Sakshi? These three questions. Let us see. The answer will give us a vivid picture of our current situation, what we are right now, and what we have to do. Ahamkarasya tadatmyam, karasya tadatmyam, chichaya deha sakshibhi, chichaya deha sakshibhi, sahajam karmajam bhranti, sahajam karmajam bhranti, janyam cha trividham kramat, janyam cha trividham kramat. Beautiful verse. He says, I am identified with three things. I am identified with the body, I am this. I am identified with the consciousness, because every time I think I, it's a conscious experience. I am conscious. And there is the witness consciousness, which according to Vedanta I really am. So I should be identified with that also. So these are the three things with which I am identified. The ego, the I, is identified with the body, with the reflected consciousness in the mind, and with the pure consciousness, witness consciousness, the sakshi. What kind of relationship? What kind of relationship do I have with these three things? With the body, with the reflected consciousness, and with the real pure consciousness, Satchidananda, with the sakshi witness? The answers are crucial. He gives the three answers. Sahajam, natural. Karmajam, born of karma. And Bhranti-janyam, born of error. First of all, my relationship, the relationship of the I with the reflected consciousness is natural. Just like a mirror and the reflection. Wherever I put a mirror in front of me, my face will be naturally reflected in the mirror. Mirror and the reflected face will always be together. How long? As long as the mirror is there and the face is there, it will be reflected. It's the very nature of the mirror to reflect. So the I sense will always feel conscious. Because pure consciousness, witness consciousness is there, the I functions like a mirror, so there will be a reflected consciousness with the I always. Reflected consciousness and I have a natural relationship. Whenever there is an I sense, there will be a reflected consciousness. Whenever there is a reflected consciousness, it means there will be an I sense. Natural. They go together. The relationship between I and the body, karmajam, born of karma. This body we have got, according to Vedanta, we have got this body because of our past karma. We have got this body because of our past karma. The good and the bad together have come together to give us results. A part of our karma. We have liquidated a part of our assets in the bank. And that liquidated asset is our karma for this life. The good and the bad. The good karma gives rise to pleasant experiences. The bad karma gives rise to unpleasant experiences. And you know what they say in Vedanta? If you have really good karma, if you have good karma, you have pleasant experiences. If you have really, really good karma, you come to Vedanta. Yeah, I'm not joking, they say that. You get a guru, you hear of Vedanta, you get a guru and a mantra, and you hear of Vedantic doctrines. Is a sign of great good karma. So I congratulate all of you. So, the karma gives us this body. This body is born of our karma. As long as my present karma, the karma of this life, technically called prarabdha karma, as long as the prarabdha karma of this life lasts, the body will last. When this particular part of my karma is exhausted, the body will die. And I am related to this body as long as that karma lasts. The moment that particular karma is finished, karma for this life is finished, the body will die and my relationship with this body will snap. I will no longer say, I am the body. They will take it and burn it or cremate it or bury it or whatever. I don't say I am that. I transmigrate. I go to another body, produced again by my new karma, with which I will have a relationship. This is the second thing. My relationship with the body is born of karma. As long as karma lasts, I will have to say, I am this body. When karma is finished, body dies, and I will no longer say I am this body. Now comes the crucial question, the real crucial question. What is my relationship, the I feeling, bear down here, concentrate here. The I feeling which we have right now, what is its relationship to the witness consciousness? That is the question. What is its relationship to Brahman, to Atman, to existence, consciousness, bliss? All the same thing. Witness consciousness, Brahman, Atman, Satchidananda, all the same thing. What is the relationship of Brahman, Satchidananda, Atma, Sakshi, witness consciousness, pure consciousness, whatever you call it, with the I feeling which I've got right now? And the answer is no relationship. There is no relationship. Bhranti janyam, it is born of error. We, the pure consciousness, we feel I in this body, it's born of error. I am really not I. Yes. You see, we chant it lovingly. Mano buddhya ahamkara chittani naham. Do you know what it translates into? I am not the mind, manas, buddhi. I am not the intellect, chitta. I am not the memory, ahamkara. Mano buddhya ahamkara chittani naham. Ahamkara. Ego. It literally translates as I am not the ego or I am not the I. The witness consciousness which you or I really are, we are the witness of the I. You have to take one step back from the I, the ego. Take a step back from the I to merge into your real existence consciousness bliss. It is not the ego who will get freedom. Moksha, mukti, nirvana, enlightenment. The ego will never get freedom or enlightenment. You will get freedom from the ego. The I does not become free. You will be free from the I. When Mr. X or Mrs. Y becomes free, enlightened, Mr. X is enlightened from Mr. X. From being the limited individual, the ego which is identified with Mr. X. The ego still remains in the mind, identified with reflected consciousness and with the body. But you, the free being now, the witness consciousness, you are separated from it. You still shine upon it. The mind works, the ego works, the body works, goes on doing what it was doing earlier. You are completely free. You recognize you have always been free from it. So the relationship between the real you and the I sense in the mind is born of error. Bhranti janyam, born of error. And that which is born of error can be corrected by knowledge. That which is born of error can be corrected by knowledge. The snake which we see by mistake in a rope is born of error. It can be corrected not by chasing it with a stick, not by shooting at it with a shotgun or trying to scare it away. It can only be corrected by knowledge of the reality that it is a rope. So only knowledge can separate us from the I sense, the ego. That's all that has been said here in the 8th verse. The 9th verse will tell us how to be free based on this understanding. If you have understood it till now, I know it's heavy going. Yes.
Who is speaking? When you are speaking right here now, is
Yes.
this reflected consciousness that's speaking or ego that's speaking?
Just look at it right now. You have got all the materials to give the answer to your question. Look at this. Here's the body. The body is speaking. You can see the voice box and the mouth is moving. Behind it is the sense or the motor organ, the vak, the organ of speech that is working. Behind it is the mind, intellect, memory, I sense, and reflected consciousness. All of those are working, isn't it? Because I feel I'm conscious. I feel I am speaking. I am using my memory. I am using my understanding. And what Vedanta says is, in the background of all that is the real I, the real Sarvapriyananda, which is the witness. Because of the witness, consciousness shines in the mind of this being. That's reflected consciousness. That reflected consciousness illumines the I sense in the mind of the being. The I sense becoming illumined by reflected consciousness illumines the rest of the mind. And from that, the body and sense organs, they all get consciousness and start functioning. Who is speaking then? It's a combination of all of them. It's a combination of all of them. It is the pure consciousness, limited by a mind and an ego and a body, that is speaking. So if I get illumination, will I stop speaking? No. Speaking is at the level of the body, at the level of the mind. That can go on, there's no problem. In fact, this will tell us what will happen. based on this understanding. How do we snap these three relationships? I and the body. How will I be free from this body? I and reflected consciousness. How will I end the relationship between myself and reflected consciousness? This I sense and pure consciousness or witness consciousness. How can we snap this relationship? How can I remain as witness consciousness? These three are answered here. Each of these verses is like bombshells. So much is packed into them. We will do this and stop for questions. Sambandhino sator nasti. Sambandhino sator nasti. Nivritti sahajasya tu. Karmakshayat prabodhacha. Karmakshayat prabodhacha. Nivartete kramadubhe. Nivartete kramadubhe. Three relationships between the I and the reflected consciousness, between the I and the body, between the I and the real I, the witness consciousness. The apparent I and the real I. Swami Vivekananda's lecture, the real man and the apparent man. So the real I and the apparent I. These three relationships, how can we snap them? How can we be free of them? He says, the natural relationship between the reflecting medium and the reflection, between the I and the reflected consciousness, will persist as long as both of them are there. When a mirror is there, there will be a reflected face. You can't do anything about it. As long as you are awake, as long as you are using the mind in the waking state or in the dreaming state, we are using the mind, there will be an I, and that I will appear conscious. Only when you switch off the mind, when the mirror is turned down and kept face down, the reflection will disappear. When you go into deep sleep, the mind shuts down, there is no reflection and there is no I sense. So, as long as the mind is there, there will be a reflected consciousness and the two will appear together. Sambandhino sator nasti nivritti sahajasyatu. Of the natural relationship between the I and the reflected consciousness, there is no snapping that relationship as long as both of the terms of the relationship are present. As long as the mirror and the face are present, there will be a reflection. Then, karmakshayat. How do you snap the relationship between yourself and the body? When karma is exhausted, at the point of death. When the body dies, the I will be free of the body. Only way, there's no other way. Karma exhausted, body dies, and the I with the subtle body goes to another body and snaps its relationship with this dead body. Now we come to the crucial thing. What can Vedanta do for us? What can spirituality do for us? Here is the crucial thing. Prabodhacha. The third relationship, the relationship between the atman, the pure consciousness, the witness consciousness, and the I sense, the ego in the mind. How can it be snapped? Prabodhat, by knowledge, by an awakening. By an awakening. When you awaken, the I does not awaken. You awaken from the I, from the dream called the limited existence of an individual. You awaken from this little cocoon. The worm which built a cocoon around itself flies out a butterfly, a glorious butterfly. So you awaken from the dream you call a limited human life. That's why the Buddha's name is so evocative. Buddha means the awakened. Meaning thereby the rest of us are either asleep or in a dream state. So awaken from the dream of being a limited individual, limited human being. You step back from it. You let go of it. There is no awakening, illumination, freedom, enlightenment for the body. The only fate of the body, I am sorry to say, is death. From dust it has come, it will go back to dust. And sooner than we think, unfortunately. Every day it is going back to dust. There is no enlightenment for the body. It will not survive death. But the subtle body survives death. The subtle body, the mind, intellect, according to Vedanta, according to every religion, not just Hinduism, Religion is based on the fact that the subtle body survives death. But there is no enlightenment for the subtle body also. It will go from birth to birth, gathering experiences. The moment that enlightening knowledge comes, that the reality, the pure consciousness, the witness consciousness remains in its, as we say, sway mahimni, in its own glory. The subtle body dissolves back into nature. Subtle body, like the physical body, was provided by nature, provided by Maya, by Prakriti. If you are a Sankhya philosopher, you will say Prakriti provided you with the subtle body. If you are an Advaitin, like most of us here, you will say Maya provided you with this subtle body. But what has come from Maya or Prakriti or whatever, it means nature. It will go back to nature. Physical bodies, we have had many. Subtle bodies, each of us has one. When we get enlightenment, the subtle body also dissolves. What we have learned so far is the first question. If I am witness consciousness, how does the body appear conscious? Answer. Witness consciousness is reflected in the mind as reflected consciousness, and the reflected consciousness in identification with the ego transmits that consciousness throughout the body. Up to the tips of our fingers we feel awareness. So body gets consciousness, borrows its consciousness from the senses. The senses borrow their consciousness from the mind, and the mind borrows its consciousness from the reflected consciousness. And the reflected consciousness is just borrowed, is a reflection of the pure consciousness which we really are. That's question number one. Then the I sense, that's what we learned. The I, the ego, is related to the body, to the reflected consciousness, and to the real witness consciousness. How is it related? Three relationships. With the body, because of karma. With the reflected consciousness, it's natural. Whenever the I will be there, it will appear to be conscious. And with the pure consciousness, witness consciousness, no relationship, error. How can we snap these relationships? Born of karma, a natural born relationship, and the relationship born of error. How do we correct them? That which is born of karma can only be snapped by death, when karma is finished. That which is natural can never be snapped. Whenever there is I, there will be consciousness. I consciousness. But what can be snapped is the relationship between the I sense in the mind and the pure consciousness which I really am. That will be snapped by knowledge. Knowledge comes in the mind, and the mind separates itself. We see that it is separated. I am not it. I am not even the I. Ahamkara. I am not even the I. I am the light shining behind the I.